Have you ever wanted to learn a new language, but just didn't have the time or money? I may have a solution for you. Her name is Jessica, and she gives free Chinese lessons daily at 11 p.m. Beijing time and 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Chinese is fun and easy if you have the right teacher. Let Jessica be that teacher and introduce yourself to the fastest growing language in the international job market today at tinyurl.com/tcjessica and tell her Ian sent you.
Do you like fine art but think it might be out of your price range? Do you have a vision for a painting that you'd like to see brought to life but you just don't have the skill? I might have a solution for you. Art by Daisy. With decades of experience, Daisy offers high-quality, affordable watercolor paintings suitable for hanging in your home, office, or even as a gift, with prices starting at just $55. Visit tinyurl.com/artbydaisy to find out more. Hello and welcome to the Deathcast. I'm your host, author, and journalist Ian Tott, and I'd like to thank you for joining me as we prepare to take our fifth look at Leonard Lake and Charles Nung. Before we get into it this week, as always, I have the normal show notes. If you'd like to follow the show on social media, just search for the Deathcast, Deathcast Official, or Deathcast Pod. You can find me on most social media platforms under one of those monikers. If you enjoy the show and like to help support it, there's a couple of ways you can do that. First and foremost, you can go to your favorite podcast app, leave a 5-star review, and follow the show. You can also go to buymeacoffee.com/thedeathcast where you can make a one-time donation to the show. And lastly, you can go to tinyurl.com/dcastpatreon where for as little as $1.99 a month, you can get access to early ad-free shows as well as exclusive content. Speaking of Patreon, I always have to give a shout out to my first two Patreon members, Channel and Anthony. They help keep this show going. Alright, now that all of that is out of the way, find yourself a nice comfy chair, kick back, relax. I've got my coffee, I've got my cigarettes. Let's go into the crypt. When we left off last week, Leonard Lake and Charles Nung had really begun their killing spree in and around the California Bay Area, specifically targeting residents of the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. We know from the evidence available that some of these victims found their way to what Leonard Lake dubbed Operation Miranda, which was his idea of holding a woman captive as a sexual slave until such a point where he tired of her and the woman was removed. I say that the majority of the victims up until this point have been males. That is going to continue to be the pattern that we're going to see from Lake and Charles. However, there are females interspersed throughout all of this who are subjected to some of the most horrific abuses imaginable. In March of 1985, Leonard Lake was able to convince two people to legally purchase handguns for him. These were .22 caliber semi-automatic pistols. One of these was his sister Janet, and the other one was a friend of his. To both he claimed, he needs it for self-defense, citing the fact that he had injured himself in the commission of one of the murders up in Wileysville. And this would take place around the period of time that Lake was getting both of these .22 caliber pistols. To set the stage for this, the victim is a woman by the name of Kathleen Allen, who's 18 years old, and how she comes to the attention of Lake and Nung is through an acquaintance of Charles's that he had served time with in Leavenworth. This is a man by the name of Mike Carroll, who is an ex-Marine. Carroll is 23 years old at this point and has remained an acquaintance of Charles. And it's known that Carroll was living with his older stepbrother, who was something of a foster father to him. Charles was familiar with Kathy, as he often volunteered to drive Kathy to the Milpitas home that Mike shared with his foster brother. It's known that Charles Nung contacted this home on at least one occasion to speak with Mike. And it's also known that in March of 1985, Mike convinces Kathy to move into a motel room with him at the Milpitas Best Inn, with the plan being that they would stay there for a period of time until they could get the money up to find themselves more permanent residency. Why he thought that it was a good idea for the two of them to move into a hotel room is really beyond me. More likely than not, it might be, a desire for privacy. However, from everything I've read on Mike's foster brother, it seems pretty apparent that his brother would have been willing to allow Kathy to move in with them, and that may in fact have saved them from the trouble that was coming their way. It's also known that Mike worked at a pizza shop with his foster brother's son, who was the supervisor, and that at some point in April of 1985, he informed this supervisor that he was planning on traveling to San Francisco in order to look at some video equipment that was for sale. Obviously, this video equipment is the video equipment that Leonard Lake and Charles Nung had stolen the previous year. So on April 12th of 1985, Mike and Kathy were at their hotel room residence when a friend of theirs who also worked at the Domino's Pizza by the name of Les Stuckley stopped by for a short visit. At roughly 10 p.m. that evening, Mike announced to Kathy that he had to go somewhere, but that he would return the following day. At this point, Mike leaves, as does Les Stuckley, and this is the last time that it is known with certainty that Mike Carroll is seen alive. 2 days pass with no word from Mike, and as far as we know, this did not seem that strange to Kathy, and it may well be that Mike was involved with some shady business dealings, and she was used to him being gone for periods of time wherein he would not tell her where he was or make contact. However, on that Sunday, April 14th, Kathy was working at the Safeway supermarket where she was employed when a phone call came in informing her that Mike was in Lake Tahoe and had been shot. And it's at this point that Kathy goes to her supervisor and informs him that, look, she has to take some time off in order to join her boyfriend in Lake Tahoe, as Mike is supposedly suffering from a gunshot wound. It's known that a copper-colored Honda Prelude with a luggage rack on it picked Kathy up in the parking lot to the Safeway. Witnesses stated that it was driven by a Caucasian male, rough age of 40 years, who was balding and had a large beard. If that description sounds familiar, that is because the driver of this vehicle, obviously, is Leonard Lake. They made their way to the hotel where Kathy and Mike had been living, where it's known that Kathy made a phone call to a male friend of hers. This male later recalled that Kathy seemed to be in a rush, informed him that she was with a man who was kind of weird, and that this man wanted to take photographs of. Again, it's unknown, at least to my mind, why Kathy Having received information that her boyfriend is in Lake Tahoe and may be grievously injured, doesn't just tell this guy to fuck off with his decision to take photographs of her, and at least from this conversation seems to be entertaining the idea. Kathy informs her friend that as soon as she arrives at her destination, she will give him a call just to let him know that she got there safely. Kathy Allen is the first full-blown known victim of Operation Miranda. Yes, there were other women who had been victims of Lake and Nung. She is the first one that it is known spent time in the bunker and was videotaped and was subjected to all manner of abuses. In fact, Lake and Nung videotaped everything that followed Kathy being brought up to the Wileysville cabin, where she is told what's going to happen to her and informed that whether she wants it to happen or not is really not important. The important thing is that she can either accept her fate and go along with it and, quote-unquote, who knows, have some fun, or she can resist what is to come and suffer the consequences. Descriptions of the films that were found at the Wileysville cabin describe Catherine Wiley as being extremely bewildered as Lake and Nung forcefully remove her clothing. Lake informs her that her boyfriend has been removed and that no one will be coming to help her. The next day, Kathy Allen contacts her supervisor at the Safeway store and requests an additional 4 weeks leave that she can remain with Carol in Lake Tahoe. Now, there's a couple of odd things from this phone conversation. The employer decides to grant Kathy her leave of absence even after she informs him that she has found prospective employment in the Lake Tahoe area. And a few weeks after this, he receives a typewritten letter which appears to show Kathy's signature, wherein she states that both she and Mike Carroll have found permanent jobs in the Lake Tahoe area and will not be returning. She also requests that the manager unload all of the contents of her locker, as well as her W-2 and her last paycheck, and ship them to a P.O. box in Wileysville, California. Concurrent to all of this, Mike Carroll's foster brother, that man's son, receives a letter purportedly from Kathy that states, "Dear John, Mike and I have moved up to Tahoe where Mike got a job with some friends. Our place doesn't have a phone yet, so Mike asked me to drop you a line and let you know the car is not working. And until we can get some money to fix it, we'll have some friends get our stuff. We'll send you a phone number as soon as we can get one." Obviously, this is all a sick ruse on the part of Lake and Ning. Videotapes found at the cabin show Kathy Allen standing naked, wearing pantyhose, giving Charles a back massage, while in another videotape, the final one, Leonard Lake is taking photographs of her in various different types of lingerie. Her wrists and ankles are handcuffs before Lake walks into the camera frame and informs her that although he intends to keep his promise, he hasn't as of yet, and that there are a lot of things that he wants to do with Kathy which he knows she will not be up for. He then proceeds to remove the handcuffs from her before he begins to take pictures of her, informing her at one point, quote, "Would you look over here, please? And even though it shouldn't make any difference to me in terms of what you like and what you don't like, I've tried to respect your feelings as best I can in these matters. On the other hand, when I tell you to do things, I tell you things that are very important to me that I want you to do." Lake then proceeds to adjust lighting in the room and take more pictures of Kathy. Lake tells her, I really want you or expect you as a matter of fact to do them, and you haven't. Kathy then replies, what haven't I done? Lake states, I'm referring to me telling you not to beat on the doors and make noise. To which Kathy replies, quote, I didn't beat on it, it's just that. Before Lake accuses her of breaking latches on a door, he then states to her, I showed you those cyanide pills, and I'm trying to tell you the truth, that they're never going to take me alive. Hopefully no one's ever going to catch me at these weird things, but if someone ever did, I'd die. The fact that you died is immaterial right now. I don't want you to die, and I don't want to die, and the best way to accomplish that is for neither one of us to get caught. So I suppose my question is, what do I do to prove to you that I'm serious about this? Kathy then asks Lake if he's asking her if he can hit her. He informs her that he's not asking her of this, as he can hit her if he feels like it. Erotically, it would turn me on. I would get a great thrill out of it. But let's say I'm still trying to keep a little bit of sanity, okay? I'm having a little war within myself between what I want to do and what I think I should do, because I promised you. And that is what we might call the decent thing to do. I'm going to hammer these hinges back flat again, and I don't want to find them bent again at all. I don't want to hear anything. Let me put this in the strongest possible terms. It was like the first night when I told you I wanted you to drink me. It ever arises again, if there's any circumstance whatsoever that leads me to think that you've been attempting to make noise, it's immaterial as to whether I hear you or anyone else hears you. You'll be whipped very severely. Now, tell me, do you understand? This goes on for a few minutes with Lake alternating between reprimanding her and cajoling her. And it's odd to read the transcripts from this, because it is obvious that Leonard Lake is having a very difficult time adjusting to the person that he has become, or rather, the part of him that has remained hidden for so long that he is now allowed to run rampant. As he talks to Kathy at times in a demeaning fashion, and at other times talks to her in a fashion that could almost be seen as romantic and caring, before launching into a fantastical tirade about a supposed girlfriend that he has who lives with the IRS. As he continues on, Kathy begins to respond to him, and some have theorized that this is what Leonard Lake spoke about in his journals, where he talked about conditioning a woman to obey his every command without question. Again, this carries on for a period of time. We don't know how long Kathy Allen was held captive by Leonard Lake and Charles Nung, only that eventually they would remove her, meaning they killed her, and she would be buried in one of the body pits on the property. You can see here, though, the manner in which Leonard Lake is handling his captives. Now, I'm going to warn you that as we continue on, the content is going to become more and more graphic as Lake and Nung become desensitized to the things that they are doing, as well as to the humanity of their victims. Going back to the day of Kathy Allen's abduction, the man who has custody of Charles Gunther's two daughters receives a phone call from Leonard Lake, who is in fact just covering all of his bases in order to keep everyone's suspicions allayed and keep himself off the radar of the police. Some interesting information that came out later concerning this entire sordid affair is that Lake's ex-wife, Cricket, was in fact sending this man $200 a month via money order in order to help take care of the girls. And again, that raises the question of just how complicit Cricket was in all of Leonard Lake's activities. Now, the entire reason that Lake actually called this man was to see if he would help him pick up a car that had broken down in the parking lot of the Milpitas Safeway. Obviously, this is Kathy Allen's car. And eventually, this man's daughter, who's 28 years old, meets up with Charles Nung at a bus station where he hands her the keys to this car in a envelope. In the end, Lake and this man sell Kathy Allen's car. Back in Wileysville, Lonnie Bond and his family are continuing to have encounters with Leonard Lake and Charles Nung. It's known that the relationship between them continues to grow more strained, and that Bond told acquaintances that he was fearful of the man as he was a survivalist who had numerous weapons, including hand grenades and grenade launchers, and that he felt uneasy living next to the man who continuously pestered his live-in girlfriend, Brenda O'Connor, to pose in the nude for him. To this same friend, Bond also related that he had been told that the man he knew as Charles Gunner was into making porno movies. Armed with this information, it's no surprise that at least one occasion, Brenda fled the cabin that she shared with Bond and went to Lodi, a town of roughly 30 miles from Wileysville, to stay with colleagues, just in an effort to get away from Leonard Lake. It's known that Bond suspected Charles Gunner, aka Leonard Lake, of going into their cabin when they were away, and had even taped hairs in strategic places around the cabin, such as the door frames and on the windows, to see if anyone had in fact entered the domicile. It is known that the situation between Bond and Leonard Lake became such that he informed friends that he planned on confronting Lake. On Wednesday, April 17th, Bond and a friend of his met in a nearby town to go over plans for a commercial enterprise. Well, his girlfriend and young son, Lonnie Jr., stayed with acquaintances in San Diego. It's known from this business partner of Lonnie's that he, again, stated he planned on taking care of a problem in Wileysville, and that this taking care of things in Wileysville would involve the use of a gun. People begged Bond not to go up to Wileysville and have this confrontation with the man that they then knew as Charles Gunner. Now, some accounts have it that Bond was actually in Arizona during this period of time, and that he was there for a motocross racing event. No evidence that I could find indicates that this was in fact the truth. He was, from what we know, based on evidence and witness statements, in the San Diego area. Confusion comes from the fact that the friends of Lonnie, the Everett family, were planning on going to a trip to Yuma, Arizona the week that Lonnie left, and that he in fact told them that he would contact them after they came back. On Thursday, April 18th, Lonnie left the San Diego area and headed to Wileysville, while on the next day, Friday the 19th, a friend by the name of Scott Stapley helped move Brenda O'Connor and her remaining possessions up to the cabin in Wileysville. Now here's where things get kind of murky. On April 23rd, CHP officers responded to the scene of an accident on I-5 between Bakersfield and the Grapevine. Now, for those who aren't aware, the Grapevine is an area of California just before you descend down into the Los Angeles Basin area of the state. Everyone knows what it is. It's really more than the halfway point down the state into Los Angeles County. On that morning at 6:40 a.m., they arrive and find a tractor trailer pulled to the side of the road, along with a pickup truck that had damage to the left side of the windshield. This pickup truck was being driven by Charles Nung, who is obviously well outside his established parameter of operations. Charles tells the officer that he had made an abrupt turn to the right and struck the semi-truck. The officer later noted that there was a male bystander and a German Shepherd also with the truck and a duffel bag in the back of the truck. After checking to make certain that the vehicle hadn't been stolen, the officer allowed Nung and his companion to leave. That following Wednesday, Scott Stapley's girlfriend receives a letter in the mail from him which reads, quote, "I know it is spelled Doolin. This is in reference to her last name, which he had intentionally misspelled on the envelope that he had mailed to her, as it was an inside joke." Continuing, "Maybe we're mirrored in each picture, never doing it the way anyone else does. I am safe on Monday noon. Take care. Love, Scott." Also on this day, this girlfriend receives a visit first from a short Asian man who she refuses to answer the door for, and then from a man whom she knew as Charles Gunner. She had met this man while visiting the Bonds up in Wileysville. Now, this next bit is absolutely out of character for either Nung or Lake. According to this woman, Charles did not introduce the Asian man with him, instead telling him to return to the vehicle before stating, quote, "He told me that he had found all of them dead in the cabin, that there was blood all over the place, there were clothes all over the place. He said that he had taken the bodies and burnt them. He used a name for it. I don't know what it was. It was putting them on a pyre and burning them Indian style, and that he had then buried the bodies and that he had cleansed the house." And this is where, again, it's getting really weird. Lake's telling her this stuff and then starts demanding that she turn all of Scott's worldly possessions over to her. And the woman, whose head is spinning, doesn't think anything about this and instead does what he has instructed her to do. As for the reason that Lake came down there, he told this young woman that when he entered the cabin and it appeared to him that there had been the illegal sales of some weapons going on, and that because of this, he had become concerned that the police may become involved, which he didn't want, and so he had decided to remove all evidence of these individuals, and that he was down there to get Scott's personal effects in order to make it appear as though Scott had moved away. He also informed this woman that he was going to forge a letter to Lonnie Bond's landlord stating that Bond and Brenda, along with their baby, had moved away. And it should be noted that in Michigan, both Lonnie Bond and Brenda Connor's families became increasingly concerned when all correspondence from their loved ones suddenly stopped. Now, officers would later find a videotape inside of the cabin where Leonard Lake is cutting off Brenda O'Connor's clothing with a knife, explaining that their baby had to be taken away and he is sleeping like a rock. It's also known that in this videotape, Charles is seen laughing as he tells her, quote, "You can cry and stuff like the rest of them, but it won't do any good. We are pretty cold-hearted, so to speak." Now, back in Wileysville, there's a number of things taking place. It's known that Lake and Nung buried 2 5-gallon buckets on the property. One of them contained all of the identification for the known victims of their murder spree, while the other contained the videotapes as well as the journals that Leonard Lake had kept leading up to the murders. Why did Leonard Lake bury these items, which had to have been updated recently, as Brenda O'Connor is seen on these tapes being assaulted? And it has to be that Lake realized that in killing the Bond family and going down to San Diego, having interactions with this woman and not removing her, he more likely than not realized that he had made a major misstep and that eventually people were going to come sniffing around. We know that Lake attempted to conceal their activities by contacting the landlord to the property and letting him know that Bond and O'Connor had moved out, that Bond had left him the car as well as the pink slip to the car as Bond owed him money, and that this landlord, in fact, turned up at the property to investigate and found no sign of his tenants, although he noted later to investigators many of their personal possessions, including their clothing as well as dishes, were left behind. Lake began writing bogus checks in the names of his victims to other victims and cashing them using the victim's identification in order to prove that he was that person. It's also known that Lake arrived at the Milpitas home of Mike Connor's stepbrother's son, and bearing a letter from Mike, demanded all of Mike's possessions. This ended up in a heated argument as the son's stepfather came out, took notice of the way that Lake was acting and how he was leering at both the man's wife and 14-year-old daughter, hit him on the chest and informed him that he had mere moments to get off of the property before there was a serious problem. The man later told a reporter, quote, "The guy was sassy. He looked at my 14-year-old daughter even worse. I thumped him on the chest and sent the woman into the house. At which point, this man scurried away like a wounded animal." At some point between the time that they went missing and the beginning of June 1985, Lonnie Bond, his son, their friend, and Brenda O'Connor were all murdered. On June 1st, Leonard Lake went and visited his sister before returning to the cabin and doing home improvements. On June 2nd, it was found that he and Charles needed material, so they drove to a lumber yard in South San Francisco at the corner of Railroad Avenue and Spruce Street. And what happened next shows not only how brazen the two men had become, but also how unpredictable Charles Nung's kleptomania was. Both he and Lake entered this store. Charles starts looking at a section that contains table vices, while Lake goes over to another part of the store to find other items that they need. As Lake is looking at these table vices, a reserve member of the San Francisco Police Department walks into the store to make some of his own purchases, and observes Charles Nung pick a table vise up off of the table, and rather than go and pay for it or put it inside of a shopping cart, simply walk out the front door with it. Now, this reserve officer goes up to a member of the store's staff and asks if they've just sold a table vise. Being told that they had not, he informs them that somebody has just stolen one from the store. So this clerk, accompanied by another staff member, go out into the parking lot, and in a far cry from the San Francisco of 2024, they begin searching for this man who has apparently stolen a vise from their place of employment. Hearing a car door slam, they look around, and very quickly they find an Asian man standing next to a gold or bronze-colored Honda Prelude. Lake, seeing these two individuals, quickly moves off from the parking lot out towards the intersection, with the clerks following him, demanding to speak with him. Eventually, Lake is able to vanish. Giving up on chasing the man, they return their attention to the car, and inside of it they can see vices and other various items. They go to the trunk of the car and notice that the lid is ajar. And I'm not upset over what happened here. However, technically what these two men do could be considered breaking and entering. They notice that the trunk of the car appears to be ajar, and they open it, and inside of it they find the missing vice. At which point they go inside and inform them that somebody has just attempted to shoplift from the store and that they need to call the police. Now, according to this man, when he got off the phone with the police, a burly man had approached him and offered to pay for the vice, and he instructed this man to go and talk to the clerks. At 11:15 p.m., officers arrived at this lumberyard. The officers are directed to the Honda, where they very quickly run a license plate check. Now, the officers again begin an illegal search of this vehicle, and it is illegal because despite the fact that the vice is inside of it, technically it could be argued that without a warrant they could not do what they did next. They proceed to go through the trunk of the car, where they find more stolen merchandise, along with a gun, which, after checking the serial number, is determined to belong to one Robin Scott Stapley of San Diego. And it's at this point that a man exits the store, walks up to the officer and informs him that, I paid for the vice, etc., etc. The officer demands identification. The man states his name is Stapley and then proceeds to produce Scott Stapley's ID, and the officer very quickly notes that the man on the ID and the one who is speaking to him bear no resemblance to one another. The officer asks who owns the vehicle. The man informs him that it's his friend Lonnie Bond. At this point, the officer asks if he has permission to search the vehicle, to which Lake replies, "Sure, go ahead, you already have anyway." Then is confronted with the fact that there is a silencer inside of the vehicle, which is illegal in California, and Leonard Lake is arrested. You have to be thinking at this point that he is internally going berserk, that after over a year on the lam, he has been undone by the fact that his cohort, Charles Nung, cannot stop from stealing. The car ends up being towed from the scene, where it is gone over tooth and nail. Inside they find a stun gun as well as slide photographs of the Bond family. Checking the VIN number, vehicle identification number, on the car, it's noted that it is connected to a man who has been reported missing by the name of Paul Costner. And at this point, it's decided that the car needs to be impounded for investigation by homicide detectives. At the police station itself, Leonard Lake is questioned by officers who basically inform him, look, we got a lot of evidence that says you're not the person you're claiming to be, that this car is stolen from a man who has been reported missing, and we're getting more and more information and that's making it look like you may in fact be involved in some fairly nefarious activities. You better come clean with us. Instead of responding to the officers, Leonard Lake, who was described as sitting defeated in the chair, asks for a pen and a piece of paper so that he can write a letter to his wife. And as he's writing this letter, he asks for a glass of water. Lake begins then to confess to the police, stating his real name was Leonard Thomas Lake. He was wanted for warrants in Mendocino County, before admitting that the man who had been with him inside of the hardware store was Charles Nung. That Nung had served time in Leavenworth, and then he clams up, finishing writing his letter, which reads, quote, "Dear Lynn, I love you, I forgive you, freedom is better than all else, tell Janet I'm sorry, Mom, Patty, and all, I'm sorry for all the trouble, love, Leonard." He then takes this note, folds it up, and shoves it inside of his shirt pocket, and as the officers are moving towards Leonard Lake to put handcuffs back on him, Lake reaches up under the collar of his shirt, pulls something out, places it into his mouth, and gulps it down with a sip of water. Leonard Lake had stated to numerous people throughout the years that no matter what happens, he refused to be taken alive. And that is exactly what happens. Faced with an obvious prison sentence, and more likely than that, a death sentence, Leonard Lake swallows a cyanide pill inside of the South San Francisco Police Department in full view of the officers. And very quickly his body goes limp and he slips into a coma. He's 39 years old at this point. At the time that this happens, the officers have no idea just why this man who's in their custody has committed suicide in front of them. Many of them would later state they'd never even seen a suspect attempt suicide, let alone carry it out with such brutal efficiency. They're left wondering what it is that he has done that's so bad that Lake would ingest cyanide and end his own life rather than face criminal charges. Because so many different names for missing persons had come up as they were booking Leonard Lake in to the police department, officers from other precincts throughout the city are contacted in regards to these missing person cases. Officers from the missing persons department arrive at this police station, are briefed on everything that had happened, the fact that Lake was unable to give the correct date of birth on the identification that he had produced before proceeding to take his own life. They are then led to the Honda Prelude, which is in the impound lot, and it's upon getting back to their precinct headquarters that the officers who had also worked the Dubs family disappearance made a discovery that was to really open the floodgates for them. Inside of the vehicle was a green fisherman's hat, and it dawned on one of these officers that in the search for the Dubs family, videotaped had surfaced of an individual using Harvey Dubs' ATM card, and in this video an Asian man was wearing the same baseball cap that they had found inside of the car. The next day, the officers received permission from Paul Costner's sister to officially conduct a search of the car. Using luminol, there was blood evidence discovered in the car, as well as a bullet. They also found a photograph of Leonard Lake and a bare-chested young woman, a bank card to the name of Randy Jacobson, receipts for travel in the name of Charles Gunner, a bill under the driver's seat in the name of Claralyn Balaz, with a address listed in Wileysville. The officers did not know where Wileysville was, as it's in a very out-of-the-way part of the state. And I've talked about this before on the show when covering cases involving Northern California. I myself lived in Northern California for a decade. People, when they think of Northern California, they think of the San Francisco Bay Area. However, there is an entire region above the San Francisco Bay Area that is unlike any other part of the state. The way I can best describe it is it's like going from New York City to Memphis, Tennessee. It is very sparsely populated, mountainous, desert-like in area, and it is filled with individuals, mostly farmers, people who live in the agriculture industry, people who do not have the same political leanings as the rest of the state, and who take great offense at the southern portion of the state, which they consider to include the San Francisco Bay Area, using their vast amount of numbers to push through any decree that they want, and ignoring their wants and desires of the people in this northern state. The people in the San Francisco Bay Area and below really don't take into account any of the wants or desires of the individuals living in this part of the state, because those individuals are so far removed from the beaten path and from what they considered to be modern society, that they're an afterthought if they're even thought of as all. A great example of this is the fact that that part of the state where, despite what media reports will tell you, the majority of California's operating capital comes from, as that is where 99% of all agriculture and beef in the state comes from. That's where that money that keeps the state afloat comes from. That area of the state is the largest producer of walnuts and almonds in the entire world. And that's not an exaggeration. So that part of the state has been trying to secede from the rest of California for well over a decade now, with a portion of southern Oregon also being proposed in this secession. So that's just a very brief overview of what these officers are dealing with, the type of area that they're dealing with. It is very rugged and rural, and generally unknown to most of the state's population. So the officers learn where Wileysville is, that it's in Calaveras County, which is roughly 3 hours from the city. They also learn where Leonard Lake's ex-wife Cricket lives in San Bruno. And as they're attempting to contact officers in Calaveras County, they also reach out to Cricket numerous times, initially to no effect, along with reaching out to their counterparts in San Diego, where they check on the status of Robin Scott Stapley, and Lonnie Bond. The officers are eventually able to make contact with Cricket. They learned that the two of them had been married, they had been divorced, they had continued a relationship, and the officers noted that upon learning that Leonard Lake was in a coma in the hospital and almost certain to die, Cricket did not seem overly concerned or emotional at this news. Cricket arranges to meet with the officers at Leonard Lake's sister's house. When they arrived, they found not only Cricket, but Lake's sister Janet, as well as Lake's mother. Cricket explains to the officer that her family owned the property up in Wileysville, but was currently not using it, that she had not been up there for some period of time. Now, the officers are quick to note that although she said that no one was using it, they had a bill from PG&E, colloquially known as Pacific Gas and Extortion by everyone that lives in California, in her name, showing that there had been usage of electricity up at this cabin. The officers are able to get her permission to visit this cabin, and it's decided that the next day they would all meet up at the store in Wileysville at 10. At that point, she would take them out to the property. That day, officers also learn about the woman who had burned a hole in the seat of Costner's car and damaged the sun visor. Officers noted that both items appeared to have been replaced. They also learned about Scott Stapley's gun, how it had been purchased on March 30th at the Accuracy Gun Shot in San Diego and picked up on April 15th. All of this is going on. Officers with the San Francisco Police Department are finally able to make contact with the sheriff in Calaveras County, where it's agreed that members of the SFPD will be able to conduct an investigation in that county, provided that 2 members from the sheriff's office are involved in the investigation. They also make contact with counterparts in San Diego and let them know what they have going on, and the officers all agree to meet up the next day in San Andreas at 8 o'clock in preparation for their trip to Wileysville. Eventually, all the officers end up in the general store in Wileysville, where they are met by Cricket and Leonard Lake's mother. They learn that Cricket has already gone up to the cabin and removed a few personal items that she stated would quote-unquote embarrass her if police found them. When pushed on this matter, Cricket informed them that there were pictures, videotapes, and a few other things that would ruin her life if they became public knowledge. Obviously, she's talking about photographs and sex videos she and Leonard Lake had made. There is, however, also the possibility that Cricket may have removed evidence incriminating her in the crimes of her ex-husband. However, this is just speculation on my part. To the best of our knowledge, there is no such evidence that is known to exist. Reaching the turn-off for the house on Blue Mountain Road, Cricket unlocked the gate that blocked access to the home. This is the shared driveway of her cabin and the Bond family, and led the officers up to the home. Upon reaching the property, officers noticed that there was a cinder block bunker built into the side of the hill, a blue pickup truck, along with a old blue Plymouth. She lets the 2 officers in the house and remains outside. Inside, the officers quickly discovered 3 cyanide capsules stored on a door frame. In one of the 2 bedrooms, they noted that the holes had been bored through each corner post, as well as in the floor, along with eye bolts massive amounts of lingerie, an Olympia typewriter, and a guitar with numerous stickers on it. In the living room, they discovered numerous video cassettes, along with a video cassette recorder and a video duplicating device. They quickly realized that this equipment may well be the stuff that went missing from the Dubs house. However, at this point, Cricket enters the cabin and lets them know that, look, their time to search the house is over. They need to leave. The officers are able to convince Cricket to allow them to remain at the property for a little bit longer. At which point, they copy down the serial numbers on all of the recording equipment. Then, using one of the sheriff's office's radios, they contact San Francisco and have an officer check the file on the missing Dubs family. It's at this point that they learn with absolute certainty that this video equipment does in fact belong to the missing Harvey Dubs. And it's at this point that the officers decide to secure the property and contact their superiors in San Francisco to request a search warrant. Now, the officers who had come up from San Diego are able to obtain a search warrant through the Calaveras County District Attorney's Office, while the officers from San Francisco remain on the property to ensure that neither Cricket nor Leonard Lake's mother go inside of the house or upset the crime scene in any way. At the property, as the officers are on their way back with this search warrant, the two officers from San Francisco continue to speak with Cricket, and it's from her that they learn that the shelter was Leonard Lake's. He had designed and built it with the intention of surviving some kind of an emergency, most likely a nuclear fallout, that she did not have the keys to it, and that even if she did, she would not allow the officers permission to go inside of it. The officers also questioned Cricket about Charles Nung, whom they learned was a friend of Leonard's, and that they had known him prior to Nung going to prison. And then they learned from Cricket that she had in fact seen Charles Nung the previous day. He had contacted her and she had driven him to his apartment on Lenox Way in San Francisco the previous day, with Cricket stating that it's very possible Charles had fled for Chicago. One of the officers would later state Cricket was, quote, a woman who lets you know she has information, then wants you to pull it out of her. While Lake's mother pontificated on the fact that her son was near death, and her other son, Donald, had gone missing. And at this point, before the officers from San Diego have arrived back with the warrant, Cricket decides that both she and Lake's mother need to leave the property to go and visit him in the hospital. We're going to end the episode at this point with Charles Nung on the run from officers, Leonard Lake in a coma in a San Francisco hospital, and officers up in Calaveras County waiting for the arrival of the search warrant. Next week we're going to get into just exactly what they found up at the cabin in the woods. But until next week, the Deathcast is a co-production of Corpse Creek Publishing in association with Big Pond Podcasts. Stay morbid!